Hi everyone, my name is Blake Kathryn. I am a 3D artist and I'm going to talk to you guys something very near and dear to my heart that I hope you're as excited about as I am to share some process into. Before anything, thank you so much Maxon, Matthias, Heather, all y'all are amazing. Always love when our paths can cross and I think this will be really fun. So for a little background on me, I am going to break the code and not share a reel because my reel is a year old and it shows very clearly. So instead, I just kind of compiled something very relevant to what we're going to be doing today, which is creating 360 dream spaces and learning how we can actually export that and upload that to something where you can experience it yourself. My preferred format is YouTube, so we'll be going through that workflow to be time sensitive. So yeah, let's not waste any more time. Let's make this all about educating you and your special little brains. And let me share kind of the aesthetics we're going for. And from there, we're going to dive into Cinema 4D. All right, so the first thing when doing 360, even before you pull your references or your direction, mood board, etc., what I find really helpful is first like remembering that you are breaking what can be seen as like a traditional mindset, you know, like whether you're working in motion or stills, like it's very common for designers or at least people in my trade to know that your final deliverable is probably an MP4 or MOV or a PNG or a TIFF file, you know, it's very flat and that's how it's experienced. And, you know, you see something kind of like what's before you right now. You have one direction, you can kind of use your imagination on what's off to the sides or the environment as a whole. And what that often means, especially if you're working on a personal or you know that this deliverable is just limited in this sphere, is that in reality, you have this good old CG memes of your design might be a little messy off camera, you know, no shame, no one's seeing it, it's fine. But that's not exactly the case here. So what our camera is going to show us is actually something that looks like this. We're going to be having no areas in our design to really hide the messiness unless we create them, such as the hallways here or something. So you really got to just off the bat know that you're going to have a much cleaner workflow. You're going to have to be a little more precious with certain decisions, especially in creating the environment itself, because those messy edges or clipping intersecting objects, etc., they're going to show. And while you can always, of course, still do the traditional editing in Photoshop or After Effects to clean things up, you also have this hard right and hard left seam. So if you have something messy that is where this seam is, you have to make sure those pixels are perfectly blended for both sides. So my number one rule is just work as clean as possible, because so many times when I was first doing this, I would have to re-render because I thought I could get a cheat out with post work, and it just didn't. It made that messy stitch, and you really don't want that. So for today's thing, I think it could be really fun. You know, we're under a time limit, so I kind of tried to pull references that lean into my strong suits. You have the movie Suspiria in the upper left. We got a couple architectural photos. I think G-Monk's like cool lighting hexagon thing or square thing in the bottom middle, and then one of my own personals, the pink image. And what I kind of have this idea of is leaning into this Suspiria image and us kind of creating just like 4 different hallways and having just cool pattern work on each of the walls, maybe some corner plants, etc. And maybe even we embrace like some changing of seasons or something, like we see in the bottom right, that beautiful luscious green. Like maybe we go for some, you know, different moods across each of the corners. But I think as a whole, I feel really confident about us being able to do something really fun in this direction, with the hero key inspo being this top left image. So the next thing to consider is lighting. And The next page is palette, but I view lighting and palette very much in tandem of each other. I think when you work with a palette such as mine, which is very shiny, lighting is so critical because you change an HDRI and all of a sudden all your textures look different. And you could go from something so beautiful to something that just needs a million facelifts, you know? So it's just really important to get that idea off the bat. And if you notice the lighting reference I pulled, which are based off 2 personal works of mine, they're very different from our mood board. You know, I'm not doing this to be like, this is going to add on to this direction page. Not at all. We're going to lean into the direction page, but what these lightings have in common is they're very even HDRIs. When I built them, they had a little bit of select colored area lights. And so we're going to lean into that because what's going to happen is I'm going to have a lot more control over lighting by just having a really clean HDRI base, so I can build things in a very painless way, so to speak. Once I start adding metallics, I'm not just going to get like these crazy white hot areas or really muddy shadows. But we're also going to have the power to add in some color through lighting later, which is just something I like to leave the door open for myself. And with that, I think the palette I'm kind of wanting to explore is one that's just pretty much within my main material library. I love marble. I'm not saying we're going to make it pink, though that would be quite on brand of me, but we're going to use some kind of like nice pop color of sorts, whatever that may be. And then really leading into iridescence, some gold embellishings, because I love some deco vibes, and Suspiria reference had Art Deco as well. So between this and our even lighting, I think we're going to have a lot of fun and have a lot of control on how to make a very simple design feel elevated and a lot more exciting to be in when we're on the 360 panel. So with all ado, let's open our good old C4D. We have made it to Cinema 4D. I'm going to quickly walk through some settings, and then we're going to get really dirty with some fun polygons. So first and foremost, I am using Redshift Render for this. I've used it for every single 360. Obviously, you can use your poison of choice. That is more so in the camera department when you get to the nitty gritty of how to make a 360. So whenever I use my version of a Redshift camera, the verbiage should translate well if you're using standard, Octane, etc. through camera tags or just through the options provided in those rendering engines. So just keep that in mind. Something really important is your width and your height. When you're doing 360s, you are working in a 2-to-1 ratio. So you see here we're in 16:9, which I believe is always the default. And 2-to-1's not even in here. You know, we got Instagram Square and all that jazz, but yeah, we don't have 2-to-1. And the other good practice is to do the, the rule of twos or the power of twos. So we're going to have, for example, if you were doing 4K, it'd be 2048 tall and 4096 wide, which is what we're going to work in. When I render, though, I'm going to multiply that by 2, so 8192 by 4096, so that I can get an 8K render. Because trust me, you really want that if your machine can handle it for showing on YouTube, because it does show. The quality loss is notable, and because it is technically a video format when you're experiencing it, unless maybe you put on ArtStation, which I believe you can upload a wrapped JPEG or PNG to, which also works quite nicely. But when it's in a video format, that pixelation or quality loss can happen. So you want to give YouTube the most power that you can. So an 8K is great. But we don't want to kill our computer now, so we'll work at this half size. Another thing I like to do is I keep my Redshift settings all super standard until we're in the texturing phase. And I even brought in some of my textures here just to save me some time. We have iridescence, golds, pearls, velvets, kind of pretty much what we saw on the mood board. But I do turn on global illumination immediately. And again, lighting is really important for me. And if you're starting in clay, which I imagine the early process of our piece will be clay for a solid second, you don't have to. But for me, I just prefer to know what the HDRI is doing off the bat. So I do brute force and I do irradiance point cloud. Sometimes if I'm feeling greedy, I'll just do double brute force. But to be totally honest, at least with 6 GI bounces, which is the other preference I have, the default is 3. I very rarely notice a difference between brute force and the IPC. So to your own discretion on that front. Also, again, if you have a weaker machine, do the GI that works for you. This is just what works really well for me and my textures. And then I typically work off 512 just while I'm working because I don't want extra noise. And then we'll be greedy and bring it up to 2048 when we go into the actual render itself. And if you can't tell, I'm very excited to learn real-time rendering technology because these can get quite labor intensive, especially at the sizes I just said. So our next goal is we are going to go to our content browser. We're going to scroll into this 3D Objects Volume 1 and find the Sacred Humans folder. And bring in a not naked human because we'll keep this PG. Let's see. So we have some poses here. And what's really great, just off the content library alone, like you can see a variety of different poses. Like this person's sitting, so it would cut off their legs, but like you could put them on the floor and like align your camera to that line of sight. Or in my case, like I prefer to usually do 360s where someone's standing. I just like having the capability of adding like floor detail later where you would look down and not literally be right off the ground. But sitting is very cool too. So we have this like lovely lady we brought in. She's great. She's excited. She's chilling in our room that doesn't exist. And now the thing is to bring in a Redshift camera. So we go to our Redshift tag, camera, and I use spherical. You can use stereospherical. I believe that is how you do the left and right, like 3D eye type of situation. Due to the fact that my HTC Vive is ancient and YouTube VR is broken on it, I have yet to get to play in that realm. So today we're going to just do a really nice normal spherical camera. And what's great with that is you don't have to learn anything in these settings for today's lesson. Like this is super approachable. All these basic settings are totally fine. And you'll be able to create anything that I pretty much shared from my own work so far in the 360 realm. So obviously we're looking at her. That's not ideal. Let's zero out our camera, all those angles, leave nothing, no stone left unangled. And we're going to go ahead and bring it up to her line of sight because that is the whole point of her. It's just a reference point. She's not going to be on our final piece. She is just chilling like a villain so we can line things up. Looks super excited. There we go. So now I have this camera, and actually I'm not even gonna zero out there we go. I'm gonna keep the Z and the X zeroed. I'm only gonna worry about the Y at this point. And that's because I'm gonna use a lot of symmetry. So there's a chance that I just wanna keep it that way, you know? So now I'm gonna go ahead and start blocking out this base floor. I prefer to do cubes for both my ceilings and my floors. You can totally do planes. But over the years, I've learned that is very often I will do some kind of Boolean treatment where I'll cut into these. And then I don't want to have an invisible plane where I can see below it and it look very flat and fake. Because we are building something that should feel of a structure, you know, in this type of creative direction. So we'll go ahead and make that maybe 1,000 by 1,000. And we'll start there. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and start building one wall. All right, so we have time traveled. We are now a little further. I built everything off primitives, sweeps, and extrusions. Nothing crazy yet, but we have a lot to get through, so I don't want you guys to watch me do very chill things. And let's go ahead and open Quixel Bridge real quick. And maybe bring in like a cool floor material. Like this is really nice, actually, just off the bat. And what I love about Quixel Bridge is once you download something and you click in and you go to your export settings and line all that up, in my case, I tend to work 4K because very rarely do I need 8K and it bogs down your computer a lot. And I do export to cinema. But because in here, I am already in Redshift, it's going to bring in my whole thing as Redshift, which is awesome. And you know, you still need to give it some love as with many stock assets. Like typically the displacement maps don't come in with it. So if you want displacement, like you'll just go to your folder. You know, you'll do locate image, shrink that down, and you can like find the normal, the displacement and all that in here. But yeah, as a whole, it brings in a really great base. And if my render was in standard, it would have brought in a standard material instead. So that's pretty cool. So we'll just go ahead and drag and drop that. I'm going to do lazy mapping, just make it cubic, and that'll probably bring out a good thing off the bat. Oh my God, we're inside her face. Creepy. Let's hide our model here. All right. So let us see. Let's go ahead and actually, before I do this, turn on symmetry. And just start. Oh, wait. That's right. I have to zero everything out. Haha. This is why I usually do symmetry at the start, but I didn't want it to be an annoying view. Zero out. Go ahead and do symmetry. Boom, boom. And now, once I pull you back and move you to the correct mirror plane. Yes, 2 walls. Exciting. And just for lazy sake of seeing our camera, I'm going to do symmetry one more. Actually, no, I won't, because this will get deleted anyways. I'll just click Control Shift and I'll just rotate 90 degrees. And that way, when I turn on my camera now, I can actually get a full experience of what it's looking like. It's probably going to look pretty ugly. Pre-warning. Yeah, very ugly. But what's super cool is you can see we have a room, which is awesome. So you can see that right in front of us is this middle plane. The stitch is exactly what's behind us, so that first symmetry. And then these side ones will be our rounded, maybe they're windows. I actually think I'm starting to get an idea already for that. Maybe it's actually a totally open space. The concept vibes are tingling. Yet again, we've time traveled. We are still just working with primitives. So again, any base knowledge, like this is all just done through placing primitives and just adding fillets and sweeps, etc., and using the symmetry tool. So let's dive into the next part. Okay. Forester. Yeah, let's start with Forester. Doesn't usually do us wrong, right? For anyone who doesn't know, it also means you've never met me before because I rave about this plugin all the time. But it's really wonderful. Highly recommend it. I have the expansion packs. I also have the main one. I think today the main one's just going to get us what we need. So I'll just stick with that one in case there's any hungry shoppers and they just want to see what the main plugin comes with. I've been on a big Willow kick, but I think I've used and abused it a bit. So, maybe it's time to move on. The natural coloring of this Delenix tree is quite stunning. I'm very into that. Let's go for it. Let's see if she does this right. And then it'll always give you a lower viewport level because they are high poly. Like, look at those leaves. Do they stress you out? Nice. And one thing we're definitely going to want to do for a living wall is we are also going to definitely... Oh, good. My thing is shut down. Take this up, move this back, and just bring in like a plant texture of some sort. Cool. Yep, the plane doesn't go past because we want to work clean. Yeah, so we're going to go maybe into bridge because bridge is quite quick with it. And bring in some kind of, like this mossy stone texture. But just so it feels like a living wall should be there. And, maybe you're making a hotel lobby, and then you should absolutely not do what I'm doing. But in this case, I wanted to really contrast the cleanliness of the other walls. So, boom, we go cubic. It's pretty much right. I don't know why cubic is always right, but it is. It's awesome. And then I am going to translate these materials by going to selecting the leaf and the trunk from the Forester asset, create Redshift tools, convert and replace. Perfect. Okay. And it thinks, just like Quixel likes to think, because textures just take a hot second. And now we have a beautiful, beautiful sweet baby tree that is Redshift friendly. Bring in our ramps. Many clients love to tell me, put a ramp on it, because that's like become my thing. I love ramps. I love emission that is gradiented in. I think I've been doing it since like 2018, and it's just an addiction I've yet to go to rehab for, I suppose. Same with being incapable of working with black and white. I don't know how people do it. And then change you to like a fun pink. And another thing I like to do is, I think it was someone who did a tutorial for Grayscale Gorilla, maybe for Redshift. Well, definitely for Redshift. But they called like backlighting / translucency, like the poor man's like subsurface scattering. And I totally agree. I love it so much. I definitely abuse it. But it lets light come through almost like a paperweight. So it's like the higher you go, the closer to like a sheet of paper you are. And I really love it for plants. And cranking it up to 1 is probably overkill. Like with everything, you have to teeter with the settings. But for now, we'll just roll. We'll go with it. And then for you, we're going to have a bump. We're going to bring in your bump. Do a color correct. And port you into good old input. Port you into good old input. Yes. I'm pretty sure it doesn't care if I do it this way. We'll see. Overall bump input. And then all I do is I increase the contrast by a decent bit, in this case from 0.5 to 0.75, and I just take saturation totally away. And that'll just give, it should give a subtle bump. And if it doesn't, then we'll figure it out. All right. And then another thing we should do is this whole cube is not going to be how it is currently. So I'm going to use this to be much skinnier. This is now a wall. It has been demoted from a floor. And we are just going to do a plane. And it's going to be a cloner for us to have like a bed of grass or flowers or blah, blah, blah. Bring you in, and you are now the one thing I always name as my cloners because I'm really good at deleting them by accident. Plant cloner. And we will give you, could be cool to just give it the same kind of material, you know, like if less is more and it's covered with plants, maybe it doesn't matter that you're not going to see this seam anyways, hopefully. And then make sure that it is not, I like to, when using Forester or any kind of plant with a cloner, I really like to leave some negative space because plants are so talented at clipping into your polygons. It's really annoying. And with the perspective of camera we saw, as you can tell, we were like looking at it from this perspective. So we are not going to see if there's a little negative space there. And if you want it to be perfect, what I would recommend is you do a cloner for some of it on something skinny like this, and then you hide this so your render won't pick it up. And then just create your actual floor this way and stretch it back out. And that's like, I've done it that way as well. But in this case, I don't think we need the extra step. And I like to keep things as minimal as possible when I can. So we're going to do it this kind of like messy magazine cutting way. Extensions. Let's dive into some expansion. Expansions are fun. What I like about the expansion, for anyone unfamiliar, is unlike what I had to do for the tree, where I had to go to Redshift, Tools, Convert, and Replace Materials, here you can just pick your rendering engine. So they got Theia, V-Ray, Corona, Redshift, Arnold, Octane, C4D. So all the good stuff. And we are feeling, I would take an audience opinion if I was actually looking at any interaction right now, but I am not. Kind of feeling, I hate this. This is where I'm my slowest because I'm like addicted to flower shopping anyways. I think something simple like chamomile. Oh, nope, the bellflower. That one's definitely going to win. Let's go with you, Sweet Nugget. And then we're going to put you in a cloner. Just leave you where you are. Go to Object. And then bring in our plant cloner. And for some reason, in the recent update, it always comes sideways for me. So I just go into my cloner, transform, and I just rotate the P -90, not positive. And it just fixes it. I don't know why. I assume it'll get fixed. It's a little weird, but whatever. And what's really cool is because it brought in as a Redshift, I have my bump already ported. I got my diffuse and my translucency in there, which means, you know, I got the backlighting to what they recommend the backlighting should be. So it's really cool. It's a very intelligent, whoever designed the way the materials translate did a really wonderful job. 5 stars, both thumbs up. All right, so this is where we're at now, and I basically just jumped ahead to like fill in more Forester plants because honestly, it's the same exact methods that you guys already saw me do in the previous steps. I'm really just like playing with the parameters and with the cloner. Like right now, the lighting's very dark, and we're gonna switch gears to that very, very soon. But I also betrayed myself and did Willow, just like I said I wouldn't do. Added some foliage up here, which, you know, once we add lighting, maybe that'll change a bit. Same with the back thing. And one thing I like to give as a final advice while we're on this plant topic before totally switching away from it is remember that in nature, everything is random. So try to not use the exact same tree. You know, change a seed, change a branch quantity, just do something because it will look less CG, unless you're going for some really creepy like Matrix Black Cat copy thing, in which case keep your identical trees and rock on, you know. But let's go ahead and start working with lighting. I think that we're pretty much at that stage where we really got to like switch gears to focusing on that. So I'm going to save. I no longer want to use this thing I was kind of just using for the block out phase. It's just very dark as a whole. So I've been finding an excuse, I hope, for this like kind of pink sky that's been calling my name. And then I think we're going to just do a bunch of area lights. So already I like that. We're going to re-enable the background. Nice. And what's kind of cool is actually with how this HDRI is it kind of lines up really nicely right here. I don't know if we'll keep that. I think the yellow is a bit jarring, but maybe once we light everything better on the inside, we'll feel differently. So let's go ahead and dive into that. I'm going to lock our camera by clicking this little render area for the render view and go to our spherical cam. And that way, when I leave our spherical cam, we're still stuck in there. And let's just go ahead and start dropping in some fun area lights. We'll go to Redshift, Light, Area. One thing I always like to do, because I fake lighting so much, like it's kind of my MO. And if you don't do it, your world's about to get rocked. But this already is way too bright and very freaky. But you can tell that like this is filling in what is getting blocked by the HDRI, because we are creating an enclosed space that is like outdoors at the same time. So I'm going to use this, change the color to pink, maybe not a warm pink because this feels like a more coolish blue pink, but kind of just play with that to get our ambience. Like that feels like it matches the sky, which is awesome. And now we're just going to kind of place it around and see where it works. And once we're at a place where like, you know what, this feels evenly-ish lit, we're going to start dropping in some textures and going wild in that department. So let's crop this in. We'll move you down. You know, I'm just going to kind of freely flow. And I like to paint it in. So you'll see me changing colors a lot. So like I'll highlight this. We'll see how I can actually, I think I might go crazier with their emission tags. Yeah. First off. And let's keep that bluish pink that we're working with. So it still feels like it's part of the space. Like it's a bit bright, but if we only make it, if we go to project and only make it include our planters, so sidewall plants. Let's see how it goes. Now it's only illuminating what's inside, which is kind of what I want for this. Because now I can just kind of be a little more free with my color and paint it in how I feel. And like, I don't love that this pink is getting really pale. So let me like double click this material and see how we can fix that. Move you over here. We'll shrink you right there. And since I use the same pink on both trees, because I like brought in these other trees and they're using the same material, we're luckily kind of in an advantageous spot there. So one nice thing is obviously Forester comes with all of its like textures in one spot. So if you're not copying them to your own folder library, you can just type in petal and find petals, and you can just type in leaves and find leaves. So I'm going to do that first and see if, I guess it's leaf. There we go. And see if I can just find a quick and easy replacement. So this one is leaf 27. And leaf 27 is like right there. And I think I need something just a little darker. So maybe leaf 25 is good. Yeah, that already brought back in some pink. And then I'm just going to maybe redden that emission, because red and green and blue all kind of flow well together. And let's maybe increase it. Yeah, now we get some red in the shadows, which is something I really love to do because it gives a more painterly effect, which I think is really, really nice. And I would imagine if you're using Octane or Standard Render, etc., it's a similar idea, just do it through the mixed rendering more than anything. Or the mixed materials, my bad. My verbiage is always all over the place. And then we will do the same thing. It's including the same master null. So if I rotate it, ideally, these plants will just be lit now. Yep. And that is something I love about being able to exclude and include lights, is it just really helps you paint it in really non-destructively, and you don't have to worry about the rest of your scene because it's all working out just fine. And actually, to make it match the sky more, we'll lift it. And now it feels like the sky is actually what's causing the illumination on both fronts. Yeah, that's really nice. Cool. So now let's bring in some more. So I'll just create another new one. And also, I highly recommend if you're working with a lot of lights, just tick off when you select them. Go to preview and then just tick off illumination. And it just keeps your viewport from getting insanely overblown, because it's going to happen. It gets like really ridiculous. And it can get really distracting too, with just like how your workflow is. If you're working in a wireframe view or something, you don't really have to be concerned about that. But I at this stage, I am not working in wireframe view. But it's kind of nice because you can be a little sloppy with it. Like, I'm not being overly precious with how these placements are happening. You know, I'm just kind of going with the flow. I'm trusting it. And it's working pretty well just for some really quick lighting scenarios. And something I think will be really cool is maybe doing it on this bottom lip too. But let's like start adding in materials so we actually can see what we're dealing with. All right, so for the materials, just like reacquainting ourselves, because I haven't looked at the direction board in a little bit. You know, we kind of went on a forester kick and a lighting kick and woohoo, all that jazz. And we actually are closer, while we started with this even HDRI, we kind of went closer to how I did this pink room, which is pretty similar. You know, it's just using a bit more of like the colored approach versus like having like a base that is very neutral and added color light on top of that, since we're doing a colored pink sky. But for textures, what I really like, now that I haven't looked at this a bit, is I kind of ignored this reference for a bit, and now it's kind of growing on me. Like, I love this idea of mosaic with water over it. So I think let's get started there with the floor and just see where it goes from there. So I'm going to go back and open Cinema. And we're going to do this. I feel like this is like one of the first things like almost everyone learns in Cinema. And if you haven't, welcome. But we are going to add a plane, add a displacer. Make the displacer a child of the plane. Go to the shader, click noise. And off the bat, you probably won't see much. Like, it looks pretty whatever. But then if we up our subdivisions and let's see. Actually up them a little more notably. There we go. Now we can see it in here. And because we don't see anything, and that's mostly just because honestly our lighting is very even. Like, the way we've done everything has been pretty careful. And outside of like just the general HDRI. So let's go ahead and add like this water texture I've made. Give it a second. And now you can see the bumps. I actually did a couple too many while it was just a plane. So let's go back maybe to 25 and 25 for the segments to chill it out a bit. Give it a second to process. Perfect. And then I will subdivide that. And if the computer gets bogged later, I'll deal with it then. But now we have this really sweet, like chill, kind of like, I don't know, water that is very surreal and it feels fun. So the issue is what's under the water just seems like nothing. And also our overhead light is definitely creating this like boxed effect of just like blown out purple. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to label this water. I'm going to go to our overhead light and just exclude the water. And let's wait for that to happen. Yep, and now it's excluded. We don't have this giant purple light. We still have some of the side lights that we had also created, so maybe let's also exclude that. I believe it was that one. We'll just select the bottom. And now we're not affected by it, which is great. If we want to illuminate the water later, I'll just do that manually, and I'll probably just do it through these two hallways. But at this moment, I don't think so. So I'm not loving what's under the water. It looks very muddy. Looks kind of gross. So if you guys remember, I brought this mosaic tile in from Quixel, and I think it might match our direction a bit. So I'm going to see if it shows up. And it does. And it brightens it. So this is like a double win. Yeah, I really like this actually. It does look a little wide, which, so let's just tick off our water to make sure that that is not just where the camera warps. Okay, so it does look correct here, which means it should look correct in render. So I'll just go ahead and keep that texture distancing, just remembering that textures are always more deformed where it fisheyes closer to you, and they're more true to how they look when you get to like this kind of front area. It's a good way to double check your scale if you don't have like the bandwidth to do test renders or stuff like that. So we have that, and it almost in Photoshop, like because this isn't where the stitch is, I could totally like wash this out and be fine if we decide to keep this. But here is where it would be less ideal. So maybe there's like a door here or a curtain or something cool that like just gives this different feeling and experience to it. But let's go ahead and now add other textures because we're working with a lot of like gray and just like untouched areas, like all these walls, etc. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of put some of my guilty pleasures in and see if any of those work. So just using the same principles we've been doing between Quixel and just my existing material library more than anything, as well as some Forester materials, I have this blocked out. You can just tell it's a little bit brighter from where we left off just a second ago, but nothing's too crazy, you know, just a little bit of brightening and this and that, and just some complicated texture detailing, all just through assets that are very painless to get between like the couple things we've gone over so far today. In addition, I'm starting to figure out what this can be, and I'd like to move on now to just something I really enjoy doing to speed up my own workflow that I think is really useful for any 3D artist, especially working with a complicated medium. And what that is kitbashing. And this is no stranger thing to probably anyone who's been around for a bit, but it's just really great to be able to use resources to help give like high fidelity fill-ins to areas that just need that extra love, and your own process or simplistic workflow isn't totally getting you there. So I'm going to go ahead and go to one of Kitbash's Kitbash kits, and that is the Art Deco one, very near and dear to my heart, as is tradition. I really like a handful of these. I use them in a lot of my works, and I just try to customize them when I bring them into my stuff so it doesn't seem too copy-paste. So, like, I think on the wall, like, this could be really cool. I think that could be really cool. Maybe some of these. I'm just going to grab a couple and we'll bring them in, and if they work, that's awesome, and if they don't work, no harm lost, because we're not creating these, you know? They're just allowing us a chance to make more complex designs, and that's really it. And then maybe for that back doorway, I'll even use something like, I don't know, maybe this square thing. We'll just try it. Yeah, not this one, this one. So let's move it back into our design. So we have everything pasted in here, and you can probably tell that you can barely see them. They're pretty much invisible. And I'm gonna just delete these missing textures. And a really great trick when the axis is misaligned and you're gonna have to rescale these and all that fun stuff is just go to mesh, axis center. And by default, all of these will be shut off. But what you do the first time is you just click all these 4 points on, and it's going to perfectly center your axis. And then once you have those ticked, you can just click execute. And now if you can see on these very small things that for each of them, the axis is going perfectly in center, which is awesome. And it just prevents you from having to change your perspective, line it up this manual way with the enable axis tool. Just very painless. And now I can just manually increase the size of each, and they're centered, and life is beautiful, etc. So I'm going to hide that one because I'm not 100% sure if that one specifically will be used yet. But one by one, I'm just going to figure out if these work. And what's great is I'm not really wasting any time on these. Like, it's really quick and easy for me to just be able to quickly see if building complexity works in this way for me. So let's go into our gold accents. We're going to definitely not keep these totally gold, but just to kind of get an idea if they work again or not. Rotate that the correct way. And actually for this, let's go back and zero out the X so we can put it in its own symmetry. And that way we get that on both sides. But I think that this is what's going to be really awesome with just being able to like create something that's more visually intriguing in a way that is efficient. It's quick. If you're doing concept art, you know, you can really hash through something really painlessly just by like using these pre-made assets and then, you know, customizing them how you need to. So like whether that's changing the textures or the length and stuff like that, it all just builds on top of each other to read as your own unique asset if you know how to kind of flex it. So here I'm just going to like retexture this. I feel like this would look good probably as maybe, let's do the marble we're using, and then we'll bring the gold underneath. Again, maybe we'll do spatial marble for this one, and then like that's too wide. So just using different selection tools to just slowly change how this looks. Like maybe iridescent would look really cool here. We'll find out shortly. Now we're like slowly just getting a much more like visually intriguing entryway. And like that works for a lot of these elements. Like this is very boring. So I would like to make this cube have some of the Art Deco stuff I just copy pasted. But another way we can do this is I'll turn off symmetry so I can edit it uniquely. And I'll pull that out a bit because working clean, even though we won't see that edge, you just want to be like super safe, you know, follow those principles of just protecting yourself by having nice edges. And then I'm going to go ahead and add segments. So displayed with the lines, maybe 5, maybe 9 actually. let's see, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think I want 9. I'm going to outline this now. And then what I can do is just do really simple. If you select U and then L, that's called loop select. And I can just select these couple things and then press M and T, and that's extrude, and just slowly create these complicated forms. And it just like allows you to really create a lot of complexity out of a piece that was built so simple. Like you can look at this and it's very much lacks personality, but this is where all the craziness can start happening. And then if I was to, let's say, the iridescent might be too crazy here, but now that we're adding some complexity, maybe it's not. If I don't like how hard lines this is, subdivision surface it, and now we almost get this like fun, like Miami wavy vibe to it. And I think that'll catch light really cool. So I'm going to use a couple of these practices just to go ahead and do that. I'll stream a bit more on this right now, but then we'll just jump forward so we can keep staying with the 360 focus we have today. So with the marquee now, subdivided, it has a cooler look, like we can see in the render preview. Like that is so much more exciting than if we go to an earlier picture view when it was just this cube. And you can just see a lot of progress in general. Like I love saving a picture viewer to also like visit back on details and like either confirm or just very clearly cancel out what does or doesn't work. And so what I want to do is add a bit more just details on this edge, kind of working with these columns and using, again, symmetry cloner, words of the day on both sides. But a really helpful tip that I actually am surprised that I forgot to mention earlier with working with 360s in general is when you have your camera and you have the protection tag on it, because we don't want to mess it up, copy that. And I like to rename it like looking or look around or whatever you want to do it, and turn off your rotation. And I like to keep it on my main, which is, I guess we'll just rename it main so we feel concrete about that, and lock it onto that still. But now when I go to look around, I can like look all around my 360 in the exact view we're dealing with, which is really cool because you can also reconfirm like your spatial distancing at this point and like your where the height is and everything like that. And so now when I move this, I'll be able to actually look around and not leave my camera view, which is like just really helpful when you get to these more like complicated stages where maybe I don't want to turn off half the walls, you know, every time I'm doing a detail. It gets kind of tedious to do that. So this is like nice to be able to handle this at this phase. And it took me way too long into doing 360s to learn this. I learned it through a fellow 3D artist I've been collaborating with, Andrew Morgan, who's Dream Fiber online. So I'm just going to do stuff like this, you know. I'm a little lazy here because our water is very impossible to see through, but I'll still just be safe and like select the very bottom and just like drag that down. So in the event that we see any shadow, like it's protected, but again, I don't really think we're going to see anything here because it's super dark. And then just continuing to customize like that. So I'll reverse select now and maybe I drag this up. And just figuring out ways to make these assets really work and enhance your designs with pretty much no pain. So now if I perhaps make this one upside down and squeeze this now back up, UI to reverse select again. Oops. Haha, I totally lied because my mechanical keyboard made me slip a key, but UI usually. There we go. And now we just have like a way cooler side that's about to happen. It's not even textured yet, and it looks like volumes better. So I'll like go ahead and just add in some really simple detailing. At this stage in the game, sometimes I like get a little sloppy with in a full transparency with layering things in. So like I'll just do that a little later. But just select these again, just like figuring out where to make textures more complicated or more simple, etc. So actually, I think the gold would look better really minimal here. And then maybe we're using the same white marble for the base. Yeah, that looks really nice. And because these are the same object, you can just select these, hold down Control, and move them. And it'll just translate all those textures up to that as well. And like you can just see like how much it's like slowly becoming night and day with creating these really fun, cool forms. And just make that a child of that so that it hopefully... There we go. Copies over. So revisiting our reference just so we continue to keep it top of mind because that's what's initially driving the piece. And, you want to make sure you kind of stick with that initial vision, at least as long as it feels right. I know we changed lighting a bit to be more like this pink image, but it's also a reminder for me to look at what initially drove this, like the kind of cubic geometric forms of this top left image. And then on the right side, these two circular forms and the relationship kind of between hard and soft. So I went ahead and I went and did a bit of further detail work. And all I did was work exactly in the kind of complex style we were already flexing. So if I open my window picture viewer, you can see that this is our piece now. And there's a lot of detail added here, but nothing here was done that we haven't already gone over in the talk today. And that includes bringing in more Quixel assets. So neither this bridge, this fallen geometric stone, this kind of ruined Colosseum, these mossy rocks, all that's brought in through Quixel. I further added a little bit of foliage. I added some curtains that were just kitbashed together from an asset I already had, and I made them different on both sides just to kind of give further visual intrigue, including doing again kind of more spline and cloner work just all along these walls and this doorway, and the opposite as well because of symmetry, to kind of create this more complicated experience. And then I brought in the softer forms through creating interesting vertical height, kind of like what we spoke about earlier, where it's like give people a reason to look up and look down. And to look down, you now have these kind of lily pads that are vibrant. They're very close to the same color space as these. I might color correct them ever so slightly more just in post. But as a whole, it all reads really cohesive and tangible. And we're ready to get into the export. So we'll exit out of this, and off the bat, we're just going to open up our settings. And as I said, we were working in 4K, but now it's time to give us some nice YouTube material. So we're going to go with 8K. And also you can upload 8K to ArtStation, Kula.co. There's a handful of sites. I believe you can use a plugin for Sketchfab to also do image wraps of up to 8, maybe 16K on there as well. And then we're going to check our save. We have 16-bit PNG. In this case, I'm rendering the sky with it. So I'm going to keep alpha channel unticked and keep enabled background on to my dome light. We're going to go into post effects, which don't exist yet, but I have it ticked on because we're going to do that shortly. And then just in Redshift, where I'm going to change, I changed IPC already to brute force, and I'm going to keep it that way. When I was working, I was doing IPC just to be a little faster. But I like kind of being greedy when I can be. And I'm going to change the number of rays from 512 to 2048 just to reduce noise where it is. And then after already working with these materials a lot, I kind of already know my Redshift samples for these, so this will be quick for me. If you ever need to test it, all you do is just kind of select your area and make sure you click the bucket render, this grid here. And you can just see what's noisy, and you can either override, like in this case, it's very common for these materials being used to do reflection and refraction. I assume because it's an open space, perhaps, that the GI being high samples already does a lot for me. But then I'm going to also just go ahead and do like a minimum and maximum I generally like, which is 256 max and 64 minimum. And sometimes it's not worth doing like the most minimum, like 2, 4, or 8. And a really large maximum, like 512, because it doesn't really mean your processing is going to make that render faster because you can go super minimum or super longer. It can actually mean that it's thinking about it harder. So I kind of like working in a somewhat intimate scale. And then in bucket rendering, if it's still noisy, I'll do an override of like 512 or 1024 and go from there. So right before we can click render, I like to do this. This is totally optional, but it's just something I personally enjoy. And I click this setting tab. Let me stretch this back out. It's going to re-render. Oh, no, it didn't. Yay. And I'm just going to turn on a couple things. So the first is LUT. And this must have remembered my settings. Generally, LUT will start at 1. And you can go through any of your like built-in or downloaded LUTs, and it'll just be super intense because it's going to start at maximum quality. So if you didn't do this step at the beginning of your process, obviously at the end it'll look very jarring. But what I like about this particular one is it brings in a lot of pink and blue. So if I reduce the opacity via the LUT strength, it just gives me a nice little bit of extra color, which I want anyways in the final product. So it's just saving me in post work. Then I like to add bloom. So we'll click on bloom, and you might notice nothing really changed yet. And I'm going to look here because I think this is a good distance from the camera, just this upper area. But I'm just going to move the threshold down until I feel kind of good about it. Like, this is blown out. We obviously don't want this. But, like, that's kind of nice. And it doesn't blow out anything that's not already blown out, which isn't too much. It's just edges that are facing the HDRI. And then the last thing I personally like to do is streak. And I tick that on. We'll go maybe to this firefly. It might be, actually, let's start with the same section. Let's do a good practice here and have consistency. And just like the last, I'm just going to bring down the threshold until it feels good. So like that's a bit bright. And is that maybe bright because of bloom? Yeah, so maybe I brought my bloom too much. And you just do a couple back and forths like this until you feel really good about it. So for me, I think if I do that at like 12, yeah, I like that. And this yeah, I think that that's a sweet spot for me. And then you get these cool little like results on these fireflies I added too, which is just spheres in a cloner with a random effector. And I like to do those at a bright opacity. But my only critique for myself on these is I just need to shrink the scale because they're just very large. So if I shrink them, those little streaks would be really nice. And maybe up the brightness too, because if they're half the size, that brightness doesn't matter if it's super crazy, and it'll create a more intense streak, which is awesome. And you can get really fun with streaks too. You can, if I go back up to where it's a little more noticeable, you can increase the streak number. As you can see here, because it's a flat object, it's not really going in star-like directions, but you can see that it is building an intensity. And if it was done perhaps on this one, maybe we can see a low res version. 1, 2, 3. You bring that up and you just get these more crazy stars. And you can go really minimal too, just like 2 and 2. I usually keep it at 3, but sometimes I like 2. And yeah, other than that, we're good to literally just click this render. So let's get to it. All right, so we have our render, and I'm just going to do a couple quick things in Photoshop before we export it to go on YouTube. And what I like to do is also do a color blocks render, just so I can quickly select things and be as efficient as possible. So this is just some practices that are really quick and painless if you're not big on post that I always think enhances it. One is I like to copy my first render just by duplicating it and putting it on soft light. If you look, it just immediately bumps up the contrast, but it's way too much. But if you lower the opacity, it can look quite nice, and it just gives you kind of that extra bit of contrast that might be lacking, especially when you do more even lighting like this, where you don't have super high highlights or low lights. And then I also, on that note, like to do a levels and just ever so slightly bump up our darker values and bump up our lighter. And then in this case, I might give an ever so slight nudge to the midtones. Not that, but like maybe a 106 instead of a 1. And so between these, we have before and after. It's just a little brighter, a little nicer. And I had said that I might do these lily pads a little closer to the greens that we have in the rest of this composition. So I'm just going to go ahead and go select, color range, click on that. I like to have some fuzziness just so it's smooth. And then get rid of everything that isn't in here. So just kind of unselect like the grass that I think is already a good color. Really quickly, boom. And from there, we'll re-hide our mask. I'll just do a levels again. Or actually, in this case, I'll do a hue sat because I think that I can just quickly like change the value that way. Oh, there we go. And now that has more blue values. I can brighten it a little bit, which I kind of like the idea of. It just gives it a more... in this case, I'm really going for just colors that are very not grounded in reality. And now it's going from something that feels a little yellowing, you know, it's fine. It's a healthy leaf, to something that feels a lot more dreamy or ethereal because it's not totally grounded in realism. So other than that, the only other thing I want to do is, since I have a matte, I have my alpha of my sky now. And what I can just do, since I don't want to mess with any of the left or right borders, because our top one is totally blocked and our bottom is blocked, like those are safe, I'm just going to only adjust the color through some levels. And that way I can just get it a little less, it feels very blended in right now. So I think it would just look really nice to be able to give it a bit more love. Like that looks really cool already. It's a little rainbow, but I like it. And then maybe bring that in. And now we kind of have this really fun, like purple feeling. Almost gives me like a Sailor Moon sky kind of look that I'm a big fan of. Okay, so I have my media in here. I have my 8K, which is this PNG, and I also licensed a song from the musician Marion, who's quite talented, has a vibe that I think will go really nicely with the art we have today. So if you want to make off your current dimensions, this is not 1920 by 1080, right? So what the quick and easiest way to make a sequence off of it is to just grab your PNG, drag and drop it to this good old little layer looking thumbnail, and boom, now we have it in this really weird, bizarre size. And what's great is if you're working in music, you don't have to stress out about how long it should be because you're just going to do it the whole music length, and boom, it's beautiful. So we can just, make sure the audio is working. This has a slow intro. We hear clicking, skip a bit. It's working. Wow, it's still working. And we're good. So that's literally all you're doing in Premiere. And then you go File, Export, Media. And this knows my settings. I do a H.264, have export and video checked on. It's all the default stuff. It should match your source, so you don't have to worry about changing it to 8K or 16K, 4K, etc. And honestly, I just tick on anything that's quality related. I doubt it really does anything, but if YouTube's going to compress it anyways, go for it. Similar with doing VBR 2-pass or CBR constant bitrate. Lately, I'm lazy and I do constant bitrate. And I like to have my videos scheduled or processing, so it's not a race from things to upload. I think anything over 100 is redundant, but again, since YouTube's compressing it on its own, I'm just going to do 150 target bitrate. And the big important thing is video is VR is checked on. In my history, whenever I do it the way I just showed you, it is automatically ticked on because it's not a standard size. However, Adobe updates all the time. We have different versions, etc. So just make sure it's ticked on. And because we did that very standard Redshift camera, all of this is correct. You got 360 degrees horizontally and 180 degrees vertically, and we're keeping it monoscopic. So then, literally, you're just going to click export, and let's dive on into bringing it to life on YouTube. Now, if you're still a little nervous that maybe you need to double check your 360 before you go ahead and upload it, because YouTube does process, it does take a second, there's a cool site called Kula.co, and it has a lot of architectural renders, 360 photography, etc. And you can upload your image by just going to upload single image. Click select image, grab your 360. I save mine to the desktop for quick access. And as it's loading, it takes, the processing's very fast. For 8K, it's maybe 10 to 15 seconds. 16K is what it can take a maximum of. And now that it's loaded, you see this blue dot. That's exactly where our camera is going to land. So it's going to land here on Kula, and it's going to start there on YouTube as well. And then you can kind of just look around and be like, okay, cool. My top stitch looks really good. I don't see any concerns here. This back stitch looks really good. I'm not seeing any red flags or things I'm concerned about. Same with the bottom in here. We're just pretty much triple checking, and you're able to check in context, which is super helpful. And it's free to use unless you want certain fancy features, but I find it really fantastic to take advantage of, to make sure your 360 is ready to go through the most likely multiple hours that YouTube is going to take to get an 8K or higher quality up. All right, so youtube.com. Cool little icon that says create, upload video. We're doing it. The final step, graduation. Select files. This should be pretty chill. We're going to go to Pixel Pusher, freelance, navigate through my world, proof, and upload our video. And because we did the 360 VR check when we did this is a really chill setup as a whole. You're just going to name it whatever you want to name it. Mine will be TBD because I'm going to schedule it because I have no idea what I want to name mine. And description, whatever. I always credit the artist, of course. So this is Float by Marion. If I want to add anything later, I can. And then it's just going to process for a bit. It's not kids content, no age restriction, etc. So then once this uploads, we're able to then go on to the next steps, which is basically just your traditional upload to YouTube flow. So it's processed now, our standard definition, hence SD. As promised, very traditional YouTube flow. You can add an end screen, whatever. You can schedule it, keep it private, public, however you want to live your life. And again, upload thumbnails, etc., add tags, nothing really crazy. But what we can do, while it is still clearly processing the, because it says it here, the 4K and 8Ks, because that takes longer, is we can at least look at it in 1080p. So just make sure that's there. And it's still pixelated. And this is probably where you can be like, that's why 8K is worth it. And you're right. It is worth it. But we can look it around. And let's really quick just refresh ourselves. Remember how I said there's a lot of fisheye in Kula? You can just see it here. YouTube is awesome. Doesn't really fisheye it, you know? So we have like a really true feeling of being in a space without that much like visual distortion, which is why at the moment it is still my favorite way to share PNG 360s like this, or, you know, still PNG sequences, etc. But yeah, once it's finished processing, you know, you can have the 8K up and you can bring the whole thing live. So that brings to a wrap our presentation. I hope this was helpful. Thank you again, Maxon, Matthias, Heather, all you lovely human beings. And I would love to answer questions. I know I tried to get through a handful of different flavors of topics today, with our focus being what we just saw. But don't be shy. And if you are shy, like, feel free to always hit me up on Twitter. That's the easiest way to reach me, is just hitting me up there. And or email, because email is always a formal, chill way as well. So yeah, let's maybe answer some questions or hang out. And thank you guys again. I really appreciate your time and attention.